What is up, Cricket Rockstar Nation? Welcome back to another video. We are at the end of 2025, and with it, let's look back on how all of the full member men's and women's international cricket teams fared in all of the international matches and events in 2025. In 2025, it was mainly dominated by the re-emergence of a South African team that won an ICC event after 27 years by winning the ICC World Test Championship for the first time, and India dominating mainly in the limited overs format, winning the ICC Men's Champions Trophy for the second time and the Asia Cup for a record 9 times, both in the United Arab Emirates. Don't forget their women's counterparts won the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup for the second time in succession, and the senior team won the Women's 50 over World title for the first time on home soil at Mumbai, while other powerhouse nations such as Australia and England have had flashes of brilliances but have struggled. So we're starting off with India as they finished number one in limited overs cricket for 2025. Their men's team had an exceptional year by winning the ICC Men's Champions Trophy in March and held the number one ranking in both ODIs and T20s. Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli were absolutely exceptional as always, as they remain pivotal, while younger stars such as Abhishek Sharma, who made 659 T20 runs this year, emerged as one of the new cores. Their women's counterparts truly had a historic year, first of all winning the U19 World Cup for the second time in succession in Malaysia. Then later down in the year, for the first time in their cricketing history, have won the ICC Women's 50 over World title for the first time on home soil at the CCI in Mumbai, beating South Africa in the final. Smriti Mandhana was the world-leading ODI run scorer for the year with 1,369 runs. For South Africa, the men's team had what has to be termed as a very successful year, finally breaking the Chokers tag by clinching their first ever ICC World Test Championship at the home of Cricket Lords by upsetting Australia in the final back in June under the leadership of Temba Bavuma. Don't forget, earlier in the year, the Proteas made the semi-finals of the ICC Champions Trophy in Pakistan. Their women's team, however, continued their rise as one of the powerhouse on the world stage by reaching the 50 over Women's Cricket World Cup final. And even though they did not win the tournament and even though they didn't lose to India in the final, Laura van der Vaart, who was the leading run scorer right throughout the tournament, was named captain of the team of the tournament. For Australia, their men's team had a year of ups and downs, losing the WTC final to South Africa and the Champions Trophy semi-final to India in Dubai. However, the only positive for Australia was an entire clean sweep of the Tour to the Caribbean, where they swept the West Indies 3-0 in the test. In that same series, they did clean them up for only 27, which I will talk about later on. And they did literally hammer them in the T20s 5-0 in Jamaica and St. Kitts. And of course, the other success was against India at home in the ODIs, winning 2-1, but losing the T20s by the same margin. However, they did retain the Ashes not too long ago quite easily, despite losing the Boxing Day test in 2 days. Overall, for them, it has been an up and down year. So as their women's counterparts, just like the male counterparts, they had a difficult year on the whole. Indeed, failing to defend their World Cup title in a shock semi-final defeat to India, marking the end of the reign of terror as the long-time queens of world cricket. Yes, Australia have won so many titles over the years. This was one of the rare times where they lost to India. In fact, this was the second time in 8 years they lost to India in a World Cup semi-final. The only positive for Australia, other than reaching the semis in the World Cup, was sweeping England earlier in the year in January of 25 by retaining the multi-format Ashes series quite convincingly, and they did it very convincingly by sweeping them in all of the matches. For New Zealand, the men's team did had a resurrection year in limited overs cricket by reaching the ICC Champions Trophy final, where they went under to India in the final in what was a very close game, I thought. And in Test, they had an undefeated year, which included commanding victories over Zimbabwe. And just a couple of weeks ago, before Christmas, they defeated the West Indies 2-0 in a 3-match series at home. Their female counterparts had what was termed a very tough year for them. They did struggle right throughout the Women's World Cup campaign in India and Sri Lanka, where most of the matches they played in Sri Lanka and in India as well, most of them were dampened by the rain, which made it very difficult in the end for them to make the last four, as about 4 or 5 of their matches were washed out and they only had a couple of wins in between, which was not enough. For Pakistan, their men's team had yet another disappointing year as they failed to qualify as the home team for the ICC Champions Trophy semi-finals on home soil, and therefore throughout the whole competition, they lost to New Zealand and India and had their match against Bangladesh washed out, and therefore ending up winless right throughout the campaign. However, on the bright side for them, they did had series successions in the T20 format, while their struggles in Test match cricket continued. Their women's team had a very successful campaign in the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup qualifiers played at home, where they won every single game. And in the Women's World Cup campaign, it was the same old story for the women in green. As expected, they finished near the bottom of the group with their only victory coming against the Bangladeshis. The England men's team had a rocky year in all formats, as the two big disappointments came in the ICC Champions Trophy, where they failed to win a single game and failed to reach the semi-finals on the whole. Yes, they did lose all of their games, including that match against Afghanistan, where the Afghans defended almost 330 runs at the Gaddafi Stadium, and that turned out to be a dark point for English cricket this year. And then too, that also led to the resignation of Josh Butler as limited overs captain. Don't forget their ongoing Ashes campaign down under in Australia has been nothing but embarrassing and carelessness, as they conceded the series in less than 12 days, or should I say less than 2 weeks. But the only positive that came out for England this year was that fascinating Test series at home against India, aka the Sachin Tendulkar Jimmy Anderson Trophy, where both teams drew 2-2. Though England should have won that last match to make it 3-1 had it wasn't for the carelessness on the final day of the series in that 1 hour, which was absolutely dramatic. Their women's counterparts had a nightmare Ashes campaign in Australia, where they lost every single game. However, they did make the women's 50-over World Cup semi-final, where they lost to South Africa in the semis. The only success for them other than making the semi-final of the World Cup this year was where they won every single game at home to the West Indies early in the English summer. And then they lost almost every single game to India later on, which turned out to wake up the English media, and their fans had them very upset. But that'll be for another time. Afghanistan had what was termed as a giant killer of an ICC Champions Trophy campaign in Pakistan, where they shocked England at the Gaddafi Stadium in Lahore. Sadly, in their last game of the group phase against Australia, it came to a tragic end as their match was washed out. Just 10 overs before Duckworth Lewis was supposed to come in effect, and had Duckworth Lewis had come in effect for that game, Afghanistan would have gone through at the expense of Australia. Other than that, it has been a very disappointing 2025 campaign for the Afghans, failing to qualify for the Super Fours of the Men's T20 Asia Cup, and also the knockout rounds of the Under-19 50-over Asia Cup and the Emerging Asia Cup, which was played in the T20 format respectively. But the main bright light for Afghanistan cricket this year was seeing the women's team operating in exile in Australia, playing an exhibition match for the first time since the Taliban took over in 2021. And let me tell you, the Afghanistan women's team really has a fairy tale story, because they came from poverty, and had it wasn't for the assistance of former Australian women's fast bowler, now commentator Mel Jones, their dreams of becoming cricketers would have come to a tragic end. That was the main highlight for the Afghans this year, other than the ICC Champions Trophy giant killer campaign, which they should have made the semis in the expense of Australia. Coming to the West Indies now, the men's team had a very humiliating year under full-time head coach Darren Sammy, who took over the role in April from Andre Kohli. Before he took over in April, the men in maroon drew 1-1 in Pakistan, or should I say 1-all. And yes, they did win a test on Pakistani soil after 34 years. And since then, it has been nothing but disappointment. They kept losing every game at home against Australia, where they were swept 3-0 in the test. In that same test series against Australia, especially in Sabina Park, Jamaica, in less than 3 days, they were bowled out for 27, and there was massive criticism all across the Caribbean. And I was one of the critics who were very livid, pissed off, and anger, and almost wanted to cuss them out big time. Then they also had series defeats to India and New Zealand away from home. And don't forget, they also had a historic T20 series defeat in the UAE to Nepal with their second string team, while the full strength team had went to India for the test. But the only highlight for the West Indies this year was that historic 2-1 ODI series victory over Pakistan in Trinidad and Tobago. And I was there at that series decider where Jaden Seals took that 6-wicket haul and ripped through Pakistani batters quite comprehensively and only bowled them out for 92 in the decider. As for the women's team, it was yet another disappointing year as they narrowly missed out on qualifying for the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup in India by the fairest of all margins. Yes, had they not hit those couple of sixes earlier on, they would have automatically qualified, but they ended up missing out at the expense of Bangladesh and net run rate. However, I did receive a request from the coach of my cricket team to cover the women's cricket alongside the male counterparts, which I will be doing from the 1st of January 2026. So look out for that, folks. The Sri Lankan men's team did had a strong year in tests at home despite losing 2-0 to Australia in January, February. Following that, they did have success in the tests and ODIs against Bangladesh, while in the T20 format, they struggled big time, especially when they went winless in the Asia Cup Super Fours and narrowly making the final of the Tri-Series in Pakistan just a few weeks ago. The highlight for them this year was of Patam Nisanka becoming one of the year's top scorers for the Sri Lankans. Talking about their women's counterpart though, they did show improvement. However, when they did co-hosted the World Cup alongside India, rain hampered most of their matches, and just like with New Zealand, they fell way short of reaching the semi-finals. For Bangladesh men's team, they had yet another inconsistent year, failing to make the semi-finals of the Champions Trophy and losing the Test and the ODI series to Sri Lanka. However, that wasn't all. They did have a shock defeat in the United Arab Emirates in Sharjah just before the Asia Cup, and where they lost 2-1, while the women's team narrowly qualified for the World Cup at the expense of the West Indies in the qualifiers in Pakistan. And did you know, before the qualifiers in Pakistan, Bangladesh did play the West Indies in St. Kitts, where in the bilateral series, they did lose almost every single game, especially where they only won just one ODI alongside one T20 on the tour, which was the only success for them, as the rest of it has been failure. Talking about failure, their World Cup campaign was a disaster where they only managed one victory against Sri Lanka, while the rest of the matches, they had a chance of upsetting England and South Africa, but had it wasn't for those opportunities going begging, they would have lost in any ways. Talking about Ireland though, we never get a chance to talk about Ireland much on my channel, on my page, beg your pardon. Ireland did continue their success as a full member nation by achieving a historic victory over Zimbabwe. Other than that, in the limited overs format, they totally struggled big time despite winning one of the ODIs against West Indies. However, that series ended up in a 1-all draw back in May. As for the T20s, they lost 1-0. Zimbabwe, for the first time in their cricketing history, played the most number of tests in a single calendar year, which was 10, but struggled for victories, losing to Ireland, England, and New Zealand at home and away. Their only main success for them this year was an ODI series win over Ireland, and they did also won one of the Tri-Series games in Pakistan against Sri Lanka. Unfortunately for them, they failed to make the final on that occasion. So, folks, that's going to do it for all of the cricket analyst videos for 2025. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did, because had it wasn't for me continuing content with the help of family and friends, I would have not reached anywhere. So, until we meet again in 2026, be good, be cool, stay frosty, and also when you're heading out tonight, please hire a designated driver once you're drinking alcohol. Please don't drink and drive. Be safe, and we'll all be back in 2026. Love you all. Bye bye for now. And also, God bless all of the children and the adults of the world. Thank you.